Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ Hero. Welcome to the program. On tonight's headlines.
Defiant anti-coup protesters returned to cities and towns across Myanmar after dozens of people were killed in the deadliest day of the junta's crackdown, with global powers condemning the brutal violence.
Police in China and South Africa have seized thousands of fake doses of COVID-19 jabs, global police organization Interpol said, warning this represented only the tip of the iceberg in vaccine-related crime.
The AstraZeneca Oxford COVID-19 vaccine appears to be more than 80% effective at preventing severe illness among the elderly, at-risk individuals after a single dose, according to preliminary research published on Wednesday.
So if it was...
Right, folks.
Third time's a charm? Not so for SpaceX, whose unmanned rocket explodes on the ground after carrying out what had seemed to be a successful flight and landing, fresh on the heels of two fiery crashes.
Whoa, 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 whoa!
Oh my God.
There you go.
First, to the ongoing Myanmar crisis, protesters again flooded the Yangon streets in defiance of the Myanmar military coup. There are reports of more force being used at certain protests around the country. The United States said it was appalled by the junta's latest deadly violence against the protesters and called for more global action. Meanwhile, the body's envoy to the Southeast Asian nation, Christine Schreiner-Bergener, said the United Nations must take very strong measures against the military. Esther Odanga is following the developments from Thailand. Esther.
Good evening, Alma, CJ, and to all our viewers. Defiant anti-coup protesters returned to cities and towns across Myanmar on Thursday after dozens of people were killed in the deadliest of the junta's crackdown, with global powers condemning the brutal violence. At least 38 people died on Wednesday, according to the United Nations, when online images streamed out of Myanmar showing security forces firing into crowds and blood-covered bodies of protesters with bullet wounds in their heads. Myanmar's military staged its coup on February 1, ending a decade-long experiment with a democracy and triggering a mass uprising that the junta has increasingly sought to quash with little force. First, let's listen to this.
We are appalled and revulsed to see the horrific violence perpetrated against the people of Burma for their peaceful calls to restore civilian governance. We call on all countries to speak with one voice to condemn brutal violence by the Burmese military against its own people and to promote accountability for the military's actions that have led to the loss of life of so many people in Burma.
I had discussion with the army and I warned them that member states and Security Council might take huge, strong measures. And the answer was, we are used to sanctions and we survived those sanction time in the past. When I also warned they will go in an isolation, the answer was, we have to learn to walk with only few friends. So I think we have really the member states have to take very strong measures. But my role will be also to continue the dialogue also with the army, because I think we can only stop this in a dialogue.
Emmanuel Macron has now added his voice and also called for immediate end of the repression in Myanmar. On Thursday, protesters hit the streets again in Yangon and Mandalay, the nation's two biggest cities, as well as other towns that have been hotspots for unrest. The junta has sought to hide its crackdown from the rest of the world, choking the internet and banning Facebook, the most popular social media platform. Six journalists were also arrested on the weekend and charged under a law prohibiting causing fear, spreading false news, or agitating directly or indirectly a government employee. Security forces have arrested nearly 1,500 people since the start of the coup, with 1,200 of them still in detention, according to Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, or AAP, monitoring group. The group said it had documented more than 50 deaths, as it detailed teenagers and people aged in their 20s who had been shot in the head and chest. There is also a battle for Myanmar in United Nations. The ambassador to the UN for Myanmar, Kyaw Mo Tan, clearly sided with the protesters, calling on UN member states to do as much as is necessary to bring the democratically elected government back into power. But of course, the military has fired him, and they have said they would like the deputy ambassador to be representing Myanmar. So, of course, it's a very difficult situation in the United Nations as to who exactly should hold the seat. Back to you, Alma.
All right, thank you very much, Esther, for your updates there, and we'll surely be following this developing story. Stay safe. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alma. Reporting live from ASEAN Bureau, this is Esther Odanga, and we live in interesting times.
Staying in Asia, there are plans to ban spectators from the Tokyo Olympics. The Mainichi newspaper earlier reported that Japan's government was planning to stop overseas spectators due to worries they would spread coronavirus in the country. We have Dennis Liu with that report. Dennis.
Good evening, CJ. Overseas spectators are likely to be shut out from the Tokyo Olympics. Japanese media reported Thursday after organizers said that public safety would be the top priority at the coronavirus delayed games. The Japanese government, Tokyo Metropolitan Government, and Tokyo 2020 Organizing Committee are leaning towards holding the massive event in front of a domestic audience only. The Yomiuri Shimbun and other outlets said. The officials fear that an influx of visitors from abroad will be a super spreader event and endanger the Japanese public. IOC Chief Thomas Bach said organizers will focus on the essentials of the games, while Japan's Olympic Minister Tamayo Marukawa said a cautious decision is necessary. Reports said Japanese organizers will soon make their position official and convey it to the IOC and IPC chiefs. Bach said last week that a decision on overseas fans would be taken in late April or early May, but Hashimoto said Wednesday that fans, hotels, and travel operators needed to know sooner. Around 900,000 tickets have reportedly already been sold outside Japan. Meanwhile, just an update on the coronavirus situation here. Tokyo Metropolitan Government officials say 279 new cases of the coronavirus were confirmed in the capital on Thursday. According to NHK, this brings the total number of people who have tested positive in Tokyo since the pandemic began to 112,624. Officials say 51 coronavirus patients are in serious condition, one fewer than on Wednesday. Japan's Prime Minister Suga Yoshihide says he may extend the state of emergency for the greater Tokyo area. The ongoing state of emergency is due to expire on Sunday in Tokyo, Kanagawa, Saitama, and Chiba. Some governors earlier expressed reservations about ending it, saying infection numbers haven't fallen far enough. Prime Minister Suga is expected to make a final decision later this week after consulting with governors and health experts. Back to you, CJ.
Well, thank you so much, Dennis, for your updates there. Please do take care. And we are always looking forward to your reports coming out of Japan.
Thank you very much, CJ. Reporting live from Tokyo, Japan, this is Dennis Liu. We live in interesting times.
From Asia to Europe now, where Switzerland is cautiously reopening its some public places as the country eases some restrictions. Mayan Glosser is joining us live from Switzerland. Hello, Mayan.
Hi, Alma. Yes, so currently Switzerland has 559,845 confirmed cases and 9,300 deaths. That's 1,223 cases and 7 deaths more in the past 24 hours. After consulting the cantons, the Federal Council held another meeting and made its decision aiming to progressively normalize social and economic life despite the pandemic situation remaining precarious. Last Monday, Switzerland took its first cautious step in reopening public places, but still with restrictions. The initial reopening phase mainly involves activities with small numbers of people or meeting outdoors, not going beyond 15 people, wearing masks and maintaining social distancing. To be more precise, all shops, museums, reading rooms in libraries and archives, outdoor areas at zoos, botanical gardens, leisure facilities, and outdoor sport facilities were reopened with the restrictions mentioned before. However, competitions in adult grassroots sports and other events remain prohibited. When it comes to activities for young ones, the Federal Council decided to expand the range of activities allowed for children, and this by raising the age limit from 16 to 20 with no restrictions on sport or cultural activities, including sport competitions and concerts, as long as there are no spectators. Children and youth choirs are allowed to sing again, and social facilities for children and teenagers will also reopen. It is said that the next stage in reopening is scheduled for this coming March 22, but the decision by the Federal Council would be taken on March 19. Measures that have yet to be considered relate to cultural and sporting events with a limited numbers of spectators, changes to the requirement to work from home, indoor sports, and the opening of outdoor areas at restaurants. Reopening of indoor areas in restaurants, allowing indoor activities, and reintroducing face-to-face teaching at university still depend on how the situation evolves. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Mayan, from your enumeration for the first phase of reopening, the restaurants were not mentioned at all. Why is that?
Well, you know, Alma, as I mentioned at the beginning, before making a decision, the Federal Council consults the cantons first. In this case, because of the precarious epidemiological situation, only a minority of the cantons were in favor to at least reopening outdoors areas at restaurants for the moment. That's why it wasn't included in the Federal Council's decision. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Thank you very much, Mayan, and very interested in what is happening there in Switzerland. Stay safe.
Thank you for having me, Alma. Stay safe, both of you. I'm Mayan Goza reporting from the Geneva, Switzerland Bureau, and we live in interesting times.
In other news, Malacanang fired back at Vice President Maria Leonor Robredo for branding President Rodrigo Duterte unpresidential and quick-tempered. Turning the table on Robredo, presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said Duterte had launched a verbal tirade against the vice president because she is always wrong. Let's listen in.
Well, yan po yung reaksyon ng Pangulo sa tao na laging mali. Ang konteksto po ng sinasabi ni Presidente na mali na naman si Vice President Robredo, yung sinasabi niya na dapat mag-antay ang mga medical frontliners ng HTAC, yung Health Technical Assessment Committee recommendation para magpaturok. Hindi po kinakailangan yan dahil binasa na nga po ng Pangulo ang batas. Recommendatory lang po ang HTAC. Ako nga po ang autor ng batas na yan. Kung ayaw niya maniwala sa akin, hindi ko na po alam kung kanino siya maniniwala. No? Pero yung letter and spirit of the law po, recommendatory talagang HTAC. At siyempre po, ang importante, mabigyan ng proteksyon sa lalong mabilis na panahon ang ating mga medical frontliners. Kaya nga po ang ating vaccination program, number 1 ang mga medical frontliners kahit ano pang brand ng bakuna ang dumating. So, yun po yung konteksto ng mga pinarating mensahe ng Presidente dahil hindi po dapat ipagsapalaran ang buhay ng ating mga medical frontliners sa panahon ng pandemya.
Last week, Robredo said COVID-19 vaccines from China's Sinovac Biotech has failed to secure a positive recommendation from the Health Technology Assessment Council, or HTAC, an advisory board that acts as a recommendatory to the Department of Health as stipulated under Republic Act 11223 or the Universal Health Care Law. Duterte, in a public address delivered Monday, responded to Robredo's call for a further review of the Sinovac vaccines by HTAC, telling her that the process for the administration of China-made vaccines has already concluded. The president said he would give Robredo money to procure COVID-19 vaccines for Filipinos. On Wednesday, Robredo said Duterte sounded unpresidential and quick-tempered when he went on a tirade against her. Roque, the principal author of the UHC law, reiterated that the HTAC review of Sinovac vaccines is not mandatory.
In other news, police in China and South Africa have seized thousands of fake doses of COVID-19 jabs, according to global police organization Interpol on Wednesday, warning this represented only the tip of the iceberg in vaccine-related crime. The Lyon-based Interpol said 400 vials, equivalent to around 2,400 doses, containing the fake vaccine, were found at a warehouse in Germiston outside Johannesburg in South Africa, where officers also recovered fake masks and arrested 3 Chinese and a Zambian national. In China, police successfully identified a network selling counterfeit COVID-19 vaccines in an investigation supported by Interpol, which has 194 members countries. They raided the manufacturing premises, resulting in the arrest of some 80 suspects and seized more than 3,000 fake vaccines on the scene. Interpol earlier this year issued an orange notice warning authorities worldwide to prepare for organized crime networks targeting COVID-19 vaccines, both physically and online. Interpol said that in addition to the arrests in South Africa and China, it was also receiving additional reports of fake vaccine distribution and scam attempts targeting health bodies such as nursing homes. It also warned that no approved vaccines are currently available for sale online.
In other news, Cambodian strongman Premier Hun Sen received Thursday his first coronavirus vaccine dose as his country battles against its worst outbreak of local infections. Earlier this week, Cambodia received first batch of 324,000 doses of AstraZeneca's coronavirus vaccines manufactured by the Serum Institute of India, provided to Phnom Penh by COVAX, a global scheme to procure and distribute inoculations for free for poorer countries. Cambodia is expected to receive an estimated 7 million doses from COVAX for 20% of the country's total population, with a total of 1.1 million doses expected to be delivered by the end of May, according to officials. Cambodia began its coronavirus vaccination drive last month after receiving 600,000 doses of Chinese Sinopharm vaccines. China has promised to donate 1 million doses of its coronavirus vaccine to Cambodia, which will cover 500,000 people because 2 doses are required. The remaining 400,000 doses are expected to arrive in Phnom Penh in coming weeks. Hun Sen, 68, one of the world's longest-serving leaders, originally planned to receive the first shot of the Chinese vaccine, but he backed away from that idea after learning it's aimed at people aged between 18 to 59.
An expert committee today said a suspected serious adverse event following COVID-19 vaccination did not have a direct link with the jab. This is in Hong Kong. The 63-year-old man who received a dose of the Sinovac COVID-19 vaccine on February 26 suffered from acute shortness of breath with cough and attended Queen Elizabeth Hospital by himself in the early morning of February 28. His condition worsened rapidly and he succumbed that morning. Now, according to the hospital authority in Hong Kong, the patient was a heavy smoker, had a history of diabetes mellitus, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, obesity, and suspected ischemic heart disease. The Department of Health emphasized that based on available data, there is no particular safety concern detected from the Sinovac COVID-19 vaccine.
Meanwhile, the Buckingham Palace says the Duke of Edinburgh yesterday underwent a successful procedure for a pre-existing heart condition at St. Bartholomew's Hospital. His Royal Highness will remain in the hospital for treatment, rest and recuperation for a number of days. Here's Ashley Espiritu of our EBC UK Bureau with that report. Ashley.
Hello, CJ, thank you. Queen Elizabeth II's husband, Prince Philip, was making slight progress after being admitted to hospital more than 2 weeks ago, his daughter-in-law Camilla said on Wednesday. Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, said the 99-year-old Duke of Edinburgh, who was moved to a specialist unit for heart tests on Monday, was slightly improving. While visiting a vaccination centre in London, she said he hurts at moments, responding to a question from a volunteer there. We keep our fingers crossed, she added, as he recovers. Philip's current stay in hospital is now his longest ever, raising fears for his health because of his advanced age. The prince was first admitted to the private King Edward VII Hospital in central London on February the 16th. Buckingham Palace said initially that he was expected to stay for only a few days after walking in unaided. Later, the palace said that he was being treated for an infection without specifying further. But on Monday, he was taken to the state-run St. Bartholomew's Hospital near St. Paul's Cathedral for testing and observation of a pre-existing heart condition. The hospital, known as Bart's, dates back to the 20th century and has a renowned cardiac unit. Philip had a stent fitted in 2011 after suffering a blocked coronary artery, undergoing treatment at the specialist Royal Papworth Hospital in Cambridge. The palace said Monday that Philip was expected to stay in hospital at least until the end of this week. Philip turns 100 on June the 10th, and his already lengthy stay in hospital has raised concerns because of his age. Camilla's husband, Philip's eldest son and the heir to the throne, Prince Charles, visited him in hospital last month. His youngest son, Prince Edward, and grandson, Prince William, have both commented on his state of health. Edward said his father, a former naval officer, was looking forward to being discharged. William further said that he was in good hands and is being closely monitored. Back to you, CJ.
Well, Ashley, just a quick question. How has the Queen been during this time that her husband is admitted in the hospital?
Well, CJ, Queen Elizabeth II, who is now 94, has herself continued her royal duties despite her husband's illness. Prince Philip is a Greek-born prince who quickly moved up the ranks in the Royal Navy before giving up his career to support his wife when the early death of her father, George VI, in 1952 forced her to take the throne. The couple have been married for more than 73 years, and he has been a constant presence at the side of the monarch, who has referred to him as her strength and stay. He was one of the most active members of the royal family until retiring from the public life in 2017. The couple have been in virtual self-isolation at their Windsor Castle home west of London since the start of the coronavirus pandemic last year because of their age. They have made only brief public appearances and in January were given a first dose of coronavirus vaccine. The palace has continued to inform that the Duke's illness is not COVID-related. So as Prince William has had said, as of now, Prince Philip is in good hands and is being closely monitored. Back to you, CJ.
Well, thank you so much, Ashley, for your report. Of course, we're hoping that the prince gets discharged very, very soon. Please take care over there.
Thank you for having me, CJ. I'm Ashley Espiritu, reporting from London, United Kingdom, and we live in interesting times.
such a long life. Thank you, Ashley. And Eagle News will be right back. Stay tuned.
This portion is brought to you by Canriv Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered: supply and installation of elevators, escalators, air conditioners, ventilators, jet towel, hand dryers, generators, access control system, factory automation, and modernization. For more info, please contact Ami Kanke at 0915-263-7198 or 0998-900-3224.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
New BMEG Integra 3000 Plus Mixed Pellets and Grains. Gawa sa tamang timpla ng expertly formulated pellets at grains para sa magandang pangangatawan at tamang timbang ng inyong mga manok. BMEG Integra 3000 Plus. Iba ang laking Integra.
Welcome back. The World Health Organization on Thursday said the AstraZeneca vaccine is effective even in areas with cases of the South African variant of SARS-CoV-2. This statement comes following a study that showed AstraZeneca shots offer as little as 10% protection against the B.1.351 variant, which was first detected in South Africa. Take a look.
And so we still believe, and WHO released a statement saying we still believe that the AstraZeneca vaccine is effective even in places where you have a large proportion of cases which could be attributed to the B.1.351 variant or the South African variant. But I want to reiterate that there is no evidence of large-scale presence of this variant in the Philippines. And as has been reiterated several times before, we have a window of opportunity to ensure that we protect as many people as possible so that we reduce the reservoir of viruses among the population and limit the possibility of further transmission, the possibility of new mutations and new variants. And by ensuring that we implement the protocols that we have, we could minimize the importation of these new variants and also ensure speedy control of the new variants from where they have been detected.
Meanwhile, the AstraZeneca Oxford COVID-19 vaccine appears to be more than 80% effective at preventing severe illness among elderly at-risk individuals after a single dose, according to preliminary research published Wednesday. The results, which have yet to be peer-reviewed, added to the growing body of evidence that the vaccine, which several countries have advised against giving to over 65s, is both safe and effective in older people. Researchers at the University of Bristol analyzed patients aged over 80 admitted to hospital in Britain with respiratory illness. A single dose of either Pfizer or AstraZeneca vaccine resulted in substantial reductions in the risk of COVID-19 related hospitalizations in elderly, frail patients with extensive comorbid disease, according to the authors. Stephen Evans, professor of pharmacoepidemiology at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, said the results provide further evidence that the vaccines are effective both in an older age group less studied in the trials.
Meanwhile, Dr. Hans Kluh, the World Health Organization's director of the European region, warned that cases of COVID-19 are resurging and calls for a return to the basics of testing and prevention to stem the spread. Take a look.
We are seeing a resurgence in Central and Eastern Europe. New cases are also on the rise in several Western European countries where rates were already high. Nonetheless, over a year into the pandemic, our health systems should not be in this situation. We need to get back to the basics.
WHO's Europe region comprises 53 nations and vaccination drives have begun in 45. According to an AFP tally based on official numbers, 2.6% of the European Union's population have received 2 doses of COVID-19 vaccines and 5.4% have got 1 dose.
To the U.S. now, where President Joe Biden met with his Mexican counterpart, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and tells him that Mexico's success is crucial to the hemisphere and that he will view the U.S. southern neighbor as an equal in a virtual summit to discuss immigration, COVID-19, and commercial issues. We have Eliza Gonzalez Manglikmot of our Washington, D.C. Bureau with that story. Eliza.
During a virtual bilateral meeting, President Joe Biden and President Andrés Manuel López Obrador of Mexico discussed the importance of cooperation between the two countries when it comes to migration, COVID-19 response and recovery, and climate change.
All the elements of my administration.
Biden and López Obrador recognized the economic and cultural contributions of migrants to both the U.S. and Mexico. Both committed to the dignity of migrants by agreeing to address the root causes of regional migration, improve migration management, and develop legal pathways to migration. On COVID-19 response and recovery, Biden and López Obrador agreed to enhance public health capabilities, data sharing, and border policies development. They recognize the need to strengthen supply chain resilience and security by starting the high-level economic dialogue. Looking ahead to this year's Climate Leaders Summit on April 22, hosted by the U.S., both leaders underscored the benefits of addressing short-lived pollutants and the need to promote energy efficiency. President Biden says the U.S. and Mexico are safer when cooperating on how to address issues that especially affect the two countries. Take a look.
The United States and Mexico are stronger when we stand together. There's a long and complicated history between our nations that haven't always been perfect neighbors with one another, but we have seen over and over again the power and the purpose when we cooperate, and we're safer when we work together, whether it's addressing the challenges of our shared border or getting this pandemic under control.
The sun is up today here in the nation's capital. It is 52 degrees Fahrenheit or 11 degrees Celsius. In Washington, Eliza Gonzalez, Manglikmot, Eagle News. We live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, Washington's security posture has been bolstered after threats of a possible breach of the U.S. Capitol, with the House of Representatives changing its voting plans to avoid gathering members on a day of potential unrest. We have obtained intelligence that shows a possible plot to breach the Capitol by an identified militia group on Thursday, March 4, according to the U.S. Capitol Police in a statement. We have already made significant security upgrades to include establishing a physical structure and increasing manpower to ensure the protection of Congress, the public, and our police officer, the police force said, adding it is taking the intelligence seriously. Now, this follows online chatter from conspiracy-embracing extremists who believe March 4 is the day former President Donald Trump will return to Washington to be inaugurated for a second term. The threat comes nearly 2 months after Trump supporters, including QAnon followers, stormed the Capitol building and laid siege to Congress in an attack that left 5 people dead and shook the citadel of American democracy. Some followers of the QAnon conspiracy theory believe Trump was cheated out of a second term, and that today, will mark his victorious return to power to confront a secret global cabal of Satanist liberals.
Meanwhile, Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the United States is ready to confront China where need be, calling the Asian power the biggest geopolitical test of the century. In his first major speech, Blinken vows that President Joe Biden's administration will emphasize diplomacy over military action. Biden made an early debut as a war president last week by ordering an airstrike in Syria against Iranian-linked Shiite paramilitaries blamed for attacks on U.S. interests in Iraq. But Blinken indicated that Biden would be sparing in military action. Watch this.
We will manage the biggest geopolitical test of the 21st century, our relationship with China. Several countries present us with serious challenges, including Russia, Iran, North Korea. And there are serious crises we have to deal with, including in Yemen, Ethiopia, and Burma. But the challenge posed by China is different. Our relationship with China will be competitive when it should be, collaborative when it can be, and adversarial when it must be. The common denominator is the need to engage China from a position of strength. That requires working with allies and partners, not denigrating them, because our combined weight is much harder for China to ignore. Of course, we will never hesitate to use force when American lives and vital interests are at stake. That's why President Biden authorized an airstrike last week against Iranian-backed militia groups targeting U.S. and coalition forces in Iraq. But in that case, and in future cases when we must take military action, we will do so only when the objectives and mission are clear and achievable, consistent with our values and laws, and with the informed consent of the American people. Our elected leaders were targeted in the violent siege of the Capitol just 2 months ago. And more broadly, Americans are increasingly polarized, and the institutions that exist to help us manage our differences so our democracy can continue to function are under strain.
Meanwhile, 10 years after the Fukushima nuclear accident, Japan's TEPCO continues its battle to decommission the crippled plant. One of the greatest challenges the operator is facing is to remove fuel rods which melted and accumulated at the bottom of the 3 reactors after a massive earthquake and tsunami triggered the biggest nuclear crisis since Chernobyl. Take a look.
まず事故10年経ちましてさまざまな取り組みをこれまでしてきましたけれども、やはりこれから大きく課題として進めなきゃいけないのは、一つはやはり燃料を取り出すということになります。燃料も溶けてる燃料と溶けてない燃料ありますけれども、今溶けてない方の燃料、これは3号機を今取り組んできて、いよいよもうそろそろでもう取り出すことができるといったところまで来ています。これ使用済み燃料プールからの燃料を取り出しと言っています。あとは溶けてしまった燃料もあります。今調査を進めてきて、2号からスタートするということで準備を進めているのが溶けてしまった方の燃料デブリの方の取り出し、燃料を取り出すためのですねロボット製作を海外にお願いをしたりということをしてますので、その中で、少し工程に影響が出ているところがあります。これは今年からですね 2号機の燃料を取り出すということで今進めてきましたけれども、少し1年近くですね少し工程が伸びるということで今工程の調整を再度ですね見直しているところになります。
The hardest step is extracting the highly radioactive materials inside. Progress has been slow due to the pandemic. The government still hopes to revive the sector. A majority of Japanese remain opposed to nuclear power after the trauma of the Fukushima disaster, and dozens of lawsuits have been filed by communities near plants in a bid to prevent them restarting.
Breaking news now here in the Philippines. The first batch of COVID-19 vaccines developed by AstraZeneca has arrived in the Philippines around 7 p.m. today. The plane carrying 487,000 doses from the World Health Organization led COVAX facility landed at the Ninoy Aquino International Airport past 7 p.m. It will later be towed to Villamor Air Base, where government officials, including President Rodrigo Duterte, will welcome its arrival. After the ceremony, the vaccines will be transported to Metro Pac, Marikina City. This is the second batch of vaccines to arrive in the Philippines following the 600,000 Sinovac vaccine doses donated by the Chinese government, which arrived last Sunday, February 28. The vaccines were initially set to arrive on March 1, but were delayed due to global supply problems.
Economic revival will still need to be carefully calibrated to prevent future surges of cases, to avoid unnecessary loss of lives, and to minimize the need to have lockdowns. Let's work together to protect all the people of the Philippines as we carefully revitalize the economy, because none of us is safe until all of us are safe. The COVID-19 vaccines have arrived, and for this we can all be grateful. WHO and UNICEF are proud partners to the government of the Philippines, and we have worked to ensure timely availability of COVID-19 vaccines, supporting the DOH in strategic planning, procurement, demand generation, and establishing a robust information system for vaccines tracking and end-user monitoring. The WHO, UNICEF, and other UN organizations and our partners in the Philippines and our donors look forward to supporting the COVID-19 vaccination campaign throughout the country. Standing together in solidarity makes us stronger. So let us continue to work together in solidarity to put the COVID-19 pandemic behind us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Abhiya Singha.
The number of doses set to arrive was also at 525,600, but that was reduced due to cargo limitations, as the vaccine will be delivered using a commercial flight, according to Carlito Galvez Jr., our vaccine czar here in the Philippines. The Philippines is expected to receive about 5.5 million to 9.2 million AstraZeneca vaccine doses this year through the COVAX facility.
In other news, engineers in central Greece were assessing the damage from a strong 6.3 magnitude quake that injured at least 11 people, damaged scores of buildings, and spread panic. Take a look.
Άλλο πράγμα. Νόμιζες ότι ισοπεδώνει το πάντα ένα οριακό, μια βουή. Νόμιζες ότι θα ανοίξει εκεί και θα μπούμε μέσα. Τέτοιο.
Δρόμο. Ο κόσμος ακόμα δεν μπορεί να συνέλθει από τον μεγάλο σεισμό. Περιμένουμε από την πολιτεία, πολιτική προστασία, περιφέρεια, να έρθουν τι θα κάνουμε, πού θα κοιμηθούμε. Είμαστε στο γήπεδο, στο έλεος.
Δεν είχαμε τραυματισμούς. Δεν είχαμε προβλήματα στους ανθρώπους. Είχαμε προβλήματα σε κτίρια παλιά, τα οποία ήταν και ακατοίκητα, και είχαμε και ζημιές μέσα σε σπίτια, ρογμές, αλλά και στο σχολείο.
The recovery work began as scores of people from the villages of Damasi and Mesokori, some 240 kilometers north of Athens, spent the night away from their homes after Wednesday's quake. Repeated aftershocks have struck the area. including a strong 5.2 magnitude tremor on Wednesday evening. On Wednesday, the local governor said at least 100 homes and other buildings in the broader area, including churches, had been damaged. Emergency services told AFP 11 people had been injured. The Culture Ministry said 4 churches, including one dating back to the 17th century, had been damaged. The U.S. Geological Survey said Wednesday's 12:16 p.m. quake, which was felt across mainland Greece, was of 6.3 magnitude. And according to the Athens Observatory, the epicenter was 16 kilometers south of the town of Elasona and 8 kilometers deep. Experts have stressed that fault lines in the area rarely produce tremors larger than the one registered on Wednesday. Greece is located on a number of fault lines and is sporadically hit by earthquakes.
Eagle News will be right back. Don't go away.
This portion is brought to you by Kubert, an expert in air conditioning and electromechanical, also engaged in structural, electrical, fire protection, plumbing, and sanitary services. Kubert, your ultimate MEPS air conditioning solutions.
Muli nating balikan ang mga awiting hatid ng ating featured composer ngayong linggo.
Bakit ka ba nakita? Malaya lang ako. Bakit ka ba? Nais ko lang. Natatawa ako. Hindi ka kayang iwan ka. Sino ba naman?
Welcome back to the news. The Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology on Thursday raised the alert status of Mount Pinatubo from normal to level 1 or low-level unrest. The increasing number of volcanic earthquakes observed has prompted PHIVOLCS to raise Mount Pinatubo's alert status, said Director Renato Solidum Jr. in a radio interview Thursday. Since January 20 of this year, PHIVOLCS has recorded 1,722 imperceptible earthquakes with magnitudes 0.5 to 2.8 beneath the Pinatubo edifice. The daily volcanic quake average in alert level 0 is below 5. Imperceptible earthquakes are volcanic seismic activities that are not felt, according to Solidum. PHIVOLCS Pinatubo Volcano Bulletin issued on Thursday said all earthquakes recorded are associated with rock fracturing processes. Slight increases in the temperatures of monitored fumaroles or gas vents were recorded, but other characteristics such as acidity remain unchanged, PHIVOLCS also mentioned in the bulletin. Solidum said that while Mount Pinatubo would not erupt soon, residents must still take precautions as this data only shows there is volcanic activity.
The United Nations has led a call for urgent support for 16 million Yemenis, including starving children, amid a massive funding shortfall for the huge aid operation in the war-crippled country. Let's take a look.
4 سنوات وحين راكضية أبكي حين مريض وما حصلناش كيف العلاج حقه حرام ما استلمنا من هنا حاجة لو هي إلا حين إلا معانا بشعير اللي نستلم كيس واحد 30 ولا قال لما يصرفون في 3 شهور يصرفون 200 ولا قال لك بدي يكملوا بعد فيها حاجة.
Millions of Yemeni children, women and men desperately need aid to survive. Cutting aid is a death sentence. The best that can be said about today is that it represents a down payment. I thank those who did pledge generously, and I ask others to consider again what they can do to help stave off the worst famine the world has seen in decades.
Today, reducing aid is a death sentence for entire families. With the war raging, Yemen's children are paying the price. And we know from studying the impact of conflict that those children will continue to pay a high price long after the guns fall silent.
The brutality of the crisis and the pressing nature of the needs mean that we have to act now. So far, only a fraction of the humanitarian response plan for 2021 has been funded.
Yemen is being pushed even closer to the worst famine the world has seen in decades. 5 million Yemenis are just one step away from full-scale catastrophe. Hunger crisis, like humanitarian crisis in general, impact women in proportionality.
Famine is creeping its way back into Yemen. And if we don't ramp up the aid operation quickly, it will swallow a whole generation. And peace is of little use if you're dead.
Tens of thousands of people have been killed in the 6-year-old war, which pits the Iran-backed Houthi rebels against an internationally recognized government supported by a Saudi-led military coalition. The term famine is used according to a globally agreed scale determined by levels of access to food, acute malnutrition, and daily deaths due to hunger. While gathering the heavy burden of data needed to formally declare a famine is hard to do, nearly 50,000 are already starving to death in famine-like conditions, according to the World Food Program.
Third time's a charm? Well, not so for SpaceX, whose unmanned rocket exploded on the ground Wednesday after carrying out what had seemed to be a successful flight and landing, fresh on the heels of 2 fiery crashes. It was yet another flop involving a prototype of the Starship rocket, which SpaceX hopes one day to send to Mars. A beautiful soft landing, a SpaceX commentator said on a live broadcast of the test flight, although flames were coming out at the bottom and crews were trying to put them out. The rocket exploded a few minutes later, lurching into the air and crashing back to the ground. The latest prototype, named SN-10 for serial number 10, took off a little before 23:20 GMT from Boca Chica, Texas. The rocket rose into the sky and progressively shut down its 3 engines as it reached a height of 6 miles or about 10 kilometers and assumed a horizontal position before becoming vertical again and returning to Earth. As seen on that SpaceX video, it appeared to have otherwise landed properly after its flight. Then came the explosion.
Right, folks. Yes. Right through.
And finally, in our news, members of the Iglesia Ni Cristo or Church of Christ in Hawaii continue their outreach in various communities even as the COVID-19 pandemic enters its 2nd year in the Aloha State. Mio Asenas from our EBC Hawaii Bureau has more.
It is our goal to simply follow what is in the Bible, to love our neighbors and fellow men, and we will continue to do that here in the island of Hawaii.
As the COVID-19 pandemic enters its 2nd year in the Hawaiian Islands, members of the Iglesia Ni Cristo, or Church of Christ in this part of the world, continue responding to the needs of their fellow neighbors. One of the neighborhoods that has benefited from the INC's generosity is the village of Pamoho in central Oahu. Church officials and volunteer members who live nearby provided bags of relief goods such as food and cleaning items. Residents also had a chance to know more about the global church. Despite recent positive signs of fewer cases and increased efforts by government to vaccinate everyone, immediate relief for the population is still in short supply. And so, INC members from Honolulu and Kaneohe responded by holding an Aid to Humanity program in Palolo Village. That included some fellowship to know more about the INC and receive some material help from the members.
Here in the state of Hawaii, no one is immune to the challenges that all people face in their lives. And even when this pandemic will slow down or even end one day, it doesn't mean that people will be free of problems. Problems were there before the pandemic began, and it will continue to happen even when the pandemic is over. That's why the Iglesia ni Cristo, or Church of Christ, continues to help our fellow men. The aid to humanity projects of the church are not a new thing. The church has been striving to help our fellow men all over the world before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and even after the pandemic is over.
Reporting from Honolulu, Hawaii, I'm Mio Asena, Eagle News. We live in interesting times.
That's a nice story to end
thank you,
our
Mio.
broadcast today. That's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. Please join us again tomorrow.
We'll see you back tomorrow. At the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.